I'll call to order the Ordinance Committee of the City Council for the City of Santa Barbara. Ms. Johnson, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember White?
Here.
Councilmember Grandhouse?
I am here.
Councilmember Frank Hotchkiss?
Here.
Thank you. Would you please read the item into the record, please?
That the Ordinance Committee forward a recommendation to the City Council to approve an ordinance amending Municipal Code Title 17.
And Mr. Coleman, are you giving a presentation?
I am indeed, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, members of the Ordinance Committee. My name is Mick Cronman. I'm Harbor Operations Manager for the city's Waterfront Department. And as you may know, the city staff, or waterfront staff, works every year with the City Attorney's Office to take a look and a relook at Title 17 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code, the Harbor, with an eye towards making any kinds of changes necessary to make sure that it accurately provides the legal framework for the policies and procedures and administrative duties we undertake at the Harbor, and so that it remains consistent and gives us the tools we need to do the job we do. In keeping with that, we've been working with, in particular, Sarah Connect, Assistant City Attorney, over the last several months, and we've identified a handful of issues that we believe warrant some change, and they're substantive, but they're relatively simple to explain, I would hope. And what I'll do is, with your consent, Mr. Chair, rather than read the long section numbers of the municipal code, they're divided pretty equally here. You see there are 5 of them here. I will go through them, and I will try and let you know where in the draft ordinance you can see the changed language if you prefer, if you'd like to look at that. Starting with liveaboard permit termination, years ago the city developed a tiered and stratified and quite frankly somewhat vague system for describing how a person might end up losing or having to relinquish a liveaboard permit. There was a system of a suspension followed by a revocation. And in my 10-plus years here at the waterfront, I think we've seen one slip permit termination, liveaboard permit termination, which went with a slip permit for egregious reasons I don't need to go into. And so we agreed, and the director concurred, that simplifying this into a simple termination clause as opposed to this tiered iterative system of suspensions and revocation made a lot more sense. And along those lines, it offered us an opportunity in the interest of consistency to add appeal language in the liveaboard permit section that is consistent with what we've got in the slip permit termination section. By the way, pages 1 to 4 describe these changes in the liveaboard permit termination clauses. And in particular, what that does is it provides an opportunity for an individual who has had a liveaboard permit terminated to first appeal for a waiver from the waterfront director explaining circumstances that may have been related to behavioral or other issues that caused the termination. And failing to achieve that success in that appeal would allow them to go to the Board of Harbor Commissioners for another level of appeal, and the board's decision on that would be final. As I mentioned, that is absolutely, the wording is almost in fact is identical except for liveaboard instead of slip permittee as the slip permit appeal language. And I say that as an entree because you're going to see that a couple times throughout here. One of the main exercises we've undertaken this year is to add that appeal language for business activity permits, mooring permits, and liveaboard permits in addition to the existing slip permits to provide consistency and, quite frankly, to liberalize the code in order to give people the greatest amount of ability to exercise their administrative remedies relative to a permit termination. The next one you see is at the very top of page 2, and that has to do with termination of slip permits. And although the language is pretty clear on the terminations, what it's absent of currently is any explanation of when a person might be able to come back and reapply for a slip permit. Until now, technically a person could come in and reapply for a slip permit a day after they'd had a permit terminated by the Waterfront Department or the Board of Harbor Commissioners on appeal. So what we've done is we've added a 1-year clause in there with discretion to the waterfront director to reinstate or to grant another slip permit to an applicant. And basically, the 1-year waiting period is designed to create some distance between, the valid reasons a slip permit was terminated and an opportunity for an individual to come back and apply for another slip permit. The discretionary part is very important because we've terminated slips on many occasions. We don't terminate a lot of them, but a vast majority of them have been for non-payment. Simply people fall on hard times and are unable to, pay their slip fees. Well, that's entirely different from a person who has behaved poorly. We've terminated the slips of somebody dealing dangerous drugs at the harbor a couple of years ago. And so the discretionary notion is one that would allow the waterfront director to say, you fell on hard times, you seem to have your finances together, this is worthy of granting somebody a slip permit again. Whereas in the case of somebody with a more egregious reason for having terminated the permit, the waterfront director might say, no, you know what, this was wholly inappropriate and a disruption and a danger to our community. We're not going to, rent you another slip permit. And by the way, just going back to the liveaboard permit, we've added a 6-month clause in there too, along the same lines as part of the termination process. Why 6 months on one and a year on the other? 6 months is more tied to the notion that a liveaboard is in fact that a living situation. And if somebody is been dislocated from their living situation for a period of 6 months, we thought an earlier review of that situation might be appropriate, whereas a 1 year for the slip permits might be appropriate in that case. That's the reason for that difference. The third one, second from the top on the second page, is appeal of a mooring permit termination. It's exactly as I described at the opening of my presentation. It's just taking that appeal language and providing that avenue of appeal for an individual who's had a mooring permit terminated. These are the city-permitted moorings east of Stearns Wharf, those 46 moorings we have there. Again, consistency is just to provide them an avenue of appeal consistent with liveaboards, business activity permits, and slip permits. The next two items, the final two items, do in fact deal with our business activity permit program. And if you're not entirely familiar, our BAP program, as we call it, is basically a program that allows people to do business in the harbor who do not have leaseholds in the harbor. This applies to folks who do the bright work, the varnish folks and the cleaning folks who come down onto the boats, folks who work on engines and things like that, boat maintenance. We have a provision for 6-passenger charters. It's a limited list, but we have a provision for people doing 6-passenger charters in the harbor. And so there are two issues relative to the BAP permit program that we wanted to address. One was advertising. The current language in the code is somewhat vague relative to permission to advertise and put up signs, advertisements, or circulars in the harbor. And I apologize. I'm going to go back one. Actually, in your staff report, the first BAP issue is the solicitation of business activity. My apologies, Mr. Chair. And what that is we've had a problem with folks peddling ice cream in the parking lots, and one fellow wanted to scrub fuel out in the East Beach anchorage, not an appropriate activity from either a pollution or a fire standpoint. And so they say, well, we don't need a business activity permit because the current language only applies to the harbor. We've amended that in draft here to apply to the harbor district, so it would apply to harbor waters out to 3 miles, and it would cover if you'll allow me, interlopers who come in without business license or a business activity permit and want to do business in the parking lots or on the beach, on West Beach or what have you, in the greater waterfront area. The second one, it has to do with circulars, advertisements, and what have you. And the first part of that is it requires that to be able to do so, they have to be in compliance with Municipal Code Chapter 2270, which is in fact the sign ordinance. And the second part of it is kind of interesting. The second part of it has to do with language in the code that allows people to post notices on the public bulletin boards at marinas 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we've always sort of considered those fairly sacred areas. Post what you want. You have a band playing on Haley Street, or you have an engine for sale and what have you. But unfortunately, the current language suggests, actually it says, the waterfront director has discretion over what's posted on those boards. And on the advice of and working with the city attorney's office, we realize that there's a latent potential for an intrusion on somebody's First Amendment freedom of speech rights. So we've taken out that discretionary language. So people are basically free to post on those boards what they want. The one caveat being is we've put up a small plastic sign on each of the boards that says offensive materials prohibited. And, of course, there's that old saw about what's offensive and what's not. And I can guarantee you this, before we ever removed anything off those boards, we would consult the city attorney's office as to our legal rights and legal standing to do that. So basically, again, a liberalization of the code to ensure the fact that nobody thinks we're going to be, taking things off the board just because we didn't like them willy-nilly. And in conclusion, Mr. Chair, we believe that these amendments, in the spirit of code maintenance, which we've been doing for many years now, will help clarify the code and Title 17 in particular in ways consistent with the way we administer waterfront affairs. And we believe it's fair and consistent with our intentions in this regard. As a side note, the Harbor Commission did on May 20th vote unanimously to advance this for your review and ultimate adoption by the City Council. And pending a favorable review by your board, we would in fact go to Council for a full review in the near future. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kronman. Are there any questions of Mr. Kronman? Yes. I have one, and that is the business activity permit. I haven't heard of that before. How does that dovetail with a business license? Is that substitute for the city's business license, or do you have to have both in order to?
Mr. Chair, the latter is correct. Having a city business license is a prerequisite to getting a business activity permit, along with demonstrating insurance certificate holding the city as additionally insured, and et cetera.
Okay, great. All right. I'll open the public portion of this. Seeing no one in the audience, I'll close it, and it's back to the committee.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Just a quick question on that. I see. I was looking for the language that supported what you just said, Mr. Corman. I see on page 13 at the top. Let's see. No person shall engage in any business or commercial activity of any kind whatsoever in the Harbor District. So that's the language district that you talked about, without first having applied for and obtained the appropriate license, lease, or permit. So where do we make it clear to whomever is interested in doing this that what the licenses, leases, or permits are? Because it's not clear here, and maybe it would change in the future. But is there a place that we make that available to people?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember House, we can make that publicly available to people. We could write an article in Dock Lines or a lot of means to do that. But currently, all that information is provided when somebody comes to apply for or inquire about a business activity permit. It's all laid out in the permit package what the requirements are for them to apply and successfully.
Including the business license that we just talked about.
Yes, sir.
All that. So if they were to sort of use it like a checklist, then if they went down that checklist, they'd be complying with this requirement.
That's correct.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
Hi. So if I want to sell ice cream out of a little portable stand, what's it probably going to end up costing me to get the permits and licenses?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Hotchkiss, assuming that it wouldn't be in conflict with other tenant-based operations and was approvable as a business activity permit, I believe it's, how much for a business license with the city, $15?
It's a percentage of what you estimate your revenue in the year will be. So
Maybe she should get you on record, Ms. Knecht, if you're going to.
All right, Sarah Knecht, City Attorney's Office. I'm not positive about what the business license costs, but it's my recollection that they base it on a percentage of what you estimate your gross revenue through the year will be. So it's a percentage, whereas the business activity permit, I think, is a set fee. Am I
Yes,
correct?
that's correct. That is, and I want to recollect here, it's not expensive. It's like, $50 to $100 a year, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay, and can more than one ice cream dealer, for instance, apply and be accepted in the spirit of competition, or do we provide exclusivity?
That, Councilmember Hotchkiss, that is a very excellent and very tough question. What we try to do at the waterfront is we try to provide a balance, and I know that's sort of a broad concept, a balance of opportunity and a balance of options for people to enjoy at the waterfront, retail and otherwise. Certainly there is overlap. There's more than one place that you can buy a hamburger. But sometimes there are niche markets that don't really provide for great opportunity for sales. I think ice cream, quite frankly, might be one of them, because there are only a couple outfits that I'm aware of down there that sell ice cream that could be probably directly affected by an ice cream cart peddler who came in. I think, like I said, it's an excellent question. I think those are the very discussions that would come up if somebody applied for a business activity to do something that had the potential for undermining the business of people with leaseholds in the harbor.
Right, because we need to balance that with the spirit of competition also, and that has a tendency to depress prices, if I can put it that way. Okay, thanks very much.
All right. Is there a motion?
There is. I will second Mr. Howe's.
Oh yeah, I was going to move, but before I do that, I just have a very important question for Mr. Hotchkiss. What kind of ice cream are you going to be selling in your cart, Mr. Hotchkiss? And will there be more than one cart at a time? Never mind. I move that we forward a recommendation to the City Council to approve an ordinance amending Municipal Code Title 17 as we have in our staff report today.
I'll second, ice cream included.
There's a motion and a second to approve the recommended changes to the municipal code as outlined by Mr. Cronman. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, so we have a recommendation approved, which will now go to City Council, and do we have an estimate of when that'll come to Council?
The ordinance would probably come back early July.
In early July. Great. So is there any other business to come before this committee? Then it's adjourned. And thank you.